Okay, so this we decided would be a good transition spot. So this is basically where video 3 ended and where video 4 is going to begin. So John Dickinson, he is one of our founding fathers who most people can't recall his names, but was so crucial, partially because of what he did here. He also was president of the Annapolis Convention in 1786, which I guess we will get to soon. But that's the convention that called for the Constitutional Convention. He was from a big tobacco family, and he was often considered the penman of the Revolution. So obviously very important. And a Renaissance man himself. He wrote music and all sorts of things. So anyway, they're having this meeting, this convention about the Articles of Confederation. And there's all these clashings of ideas. Do we form a strong, consolidated government? Or do we have more like a loose union um, of the states? So finally, the Articles of Confederation represented a compromise between them. But that compromise was not so effective in the long run. So, for example, Article 9 gave Congress the sole authority to regulate foreign affairs, to declare war, to mediate interstate boundary disputes, to manage the post office, to administer relationships with the Native Americans living outside the state boundaries. But the Articles also limited what Congress could do. Um, Broad governing powers were given to the states. So when you think of states' rights, the Articles gave most of the power to the states, not the federal government. But Congress couldn't raise troops and it couldn't levy taxes. So it has the power to declare war, but not raise troops. See a problem there. You see a problem when it can't raise taxes. How is it going to pay for all the things that it does have the power to do, right? So that's sort of why it became very weak. Anyway, the Congress sent the articles to the states for approval in November of 1777. However, they weren't ratified until March of 1781 for a couple of reasons. A ratification required approval of all 13 states. That's a hard thing to try to do. There was also lots of disputes. For example, what about the land west of the Appalachian Mountains? Remember how the Appalachian Mountains were like that border when we did all those colonial maps? That was a big contention at the time. So as all this was going on, Congress was trying to manage the war as best as it could. Was not easy. Congress realized it was sort of ineffective. So in 1778, they temporarily granted Washington a lot of extraordinary power and asked him to manage the war basically on his own. So think about that a lot as he becomes president, and powers and balance of powers, and um, what power he was given and he eventually turned over that he didn't want at the end. Now the war starts to move south. The British shifted the war to the south, realizing that it would sort of become more in Britain's favor in that way because there's less, I don't want to say industrialization, but sort of less industry at the time. So their first target was Georgia. It's a small state. It's pretty isolated. It was very defenseless. And in December of 1778, Savannah, which was Georgia's major port, it fell to an attack by sea. For 2 years, the revolution in that state was virtually non-existent. Then the British turned to the Carolinas, and they did very well there as well. On May 12th of 1780, Charleston surrendered after about a month of fighting, and it had about 225 casualties on the British side, but they captured an entire American garrison of over 5,000 troops, and that was the costliest American defeat of the entire war. And yet, we don't hear about it too often. In South Carolina, the British commander Cornwallis killed almost 1,000 colonists and captured over 1,000 more, and that temporarily destroyed the Southern Continental Army. So things are not going well for the colonists, right? In October of 1780, Washington sort of groomed another commander, knowing he couldn't do this by himself. And I'm going to do a little lesson on the Battle of Brandywine, where I'll discuss this. So, and that person he sort of groomed was Nathaniel Greene, and that's his image and his signature there. So Nathaniel Greene was sent south to lead the Continental forces there. Um, Greene knew the region, and he knew what kind of war needed to be fought there. He was determined. He didn't want to fight large-scale encounters, instead dividing his army into small, little mobile bands. Today, we would call what Greene did guerrilla tactics. He just harassed the British army and their loyalist allies. He would strike them by surprise, and then they would just sort of disappear into the woods, kind of thing. The British were not happy. They thought that was sort of like dishonorable ways of fighting. Now we have Cowpen, South Carolina. And in January of 1781, American troops under General Morgan won a big victory there. They had less than 75 casualties, while the British suffered 329 deaths. And they also took 600 British prisoners. Cornwallis did win in North Carolina in March at a courthouse, but sometimes even your wins become losses because it was at such a cost that he had to retreat to Wilmington, closer to the sea. So there's more battles, the war's going on, but the colonists are still having trouble. And then a really, really important thing changes the war, and that's that the French entered. If you've been to Morristown, you might see that statue on the green with Washington, I think Hamilton, and Lafayette. And that was all about Washington negotiating how to get the French involved in the war. So the French turned the tide of the war. Cornwallis's fate was pretty much sealed by that point. And October 19th of 1781, he surrendered. The preliminary Articles of Peace weren't signed much later until November of 1782. But everyone knew after the British defeat at Yorktown that the Americans had won their independence. So that is where we're going to leave it. And we'll get up into things following the revolution. Maybe I'll do that little case study of Brandywine first. But please ask me if you have any questions on any of this stuff.